Good evening, everyone. I'm Simran from MASH, and I'm very excited to be opening today's event. Kofi Annan once said, "There's no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women." Women taking affirmative action to change the climate reality are proof of this sentiment. On this note, I welcome you all to SheInspires, where we've brought some of the leading women voices who are making our world more sustainable to live in. We stand with UN Women this International Women's Day in their pledge to gender equality for sustainable future. From women industry leaders addressing climate change at every step of the supply chain, female finance heads committing to divest from fossil fuels and green their investments, to individual female citizens using their unique influence to bring positive change, women are driving the climate change movement by hashtag breaking the bias. Today, we celebrate and support their leadership. SheInspires will have two panel discussions, which are curated by MASH Project Foundation and supported by our institutional partner, Shivnada University, and our media partner, Daily Hunt. Through this initiative, we hope to gain an insight into the work of women leaders driving change in the field of sustainability, their challenges, and achievement. We aim to celebrate their journeys and inspire young individuals, especially young girls, to take their first step into future change, into being future change makers, to bridge gender gap and accelerate work towards a green economy. At She Inspires, we will be exploring two broad themes: women entrepreneurs solving for climate change and the value for ESG growth in the race to net zero. I'd like to invite my colleague, Ms. Urja Chabra, who will be moderating the first panel discussion. She's passionate and purposeful business and has about she's passionate and purposeful and she's passionate about purposeful businesses and has worked with startups, consulting organizations in different capacities. Previously, she has worked with Harvard, where she worked on design and delivery of tech solutions, focusing on ESG for Fortune 200 organizations. She's an active speaker on panels related to sustainability, impact, and climate action. In her current role, she's driving ESG initiatives at MASH. I'm super excited to hear what these amazing women have to say, and I'm sure you all are too. So, without further ado, I invite Urja to introduce the first panel.
Thank you, Simran, and wishing all our viewers a very happy Women's Day. So, while climate change affects all of us, women and girls bear the greatest burden. However, women are not just victims of climate change and its effects. They're also critical in delivering solutions at local and global levels when they're equally and effectively supported. So, with the latest data, we now understand the vital link between gender, social equity, and climate change, and recognize that without gender equality, today, a sustainable future and equal future remains out of reach. So now we have a panel of women who are not afraid of using in their entrepreneurial and business skills, tackling one of the most important issues of climate change. And I'm here to introduce you to to you all. So firstly, we have Garvita Gulhati, who's the founder and CEO of Why Waste. Second, we have Gayatri Chauhan, who's the founder and CEO of Buzz on Earth and Gaia the Earth Foundation. Next, we have Pragya Vats, who is the head of campaigns at Save the Children. And lastly, we have Nupur Agarwal, founder of Evolve Foundation and co-founder of Kiwi Kisan Window. Hi Pragya, hi Garvita.
Hi. Sorry, I just sort of got logged out. Apologies. Yeah.
No worries. We are all new to this technology and we're still adapting to the various apps that come along the way. Hi Nupur.
Hi. I'm so sorry. Like, again, I think I had a technical error and I wasn't able to connect it over to my laptop. So now I'm from the phone. Yeah.
No worries. So now I think we should get started with the discussion for today's panel. And I won't be able to do justice to all the work that you've done. So now I'll be opening the floor to understand and learn more about what what you do, and more importantly, why you do what you do. So I'll be going in an alphabetical order. So starting with Garvita.
Um, Thank you so much, Urja, for inviting me to speak, and thank you to the Mash Project Foundation and everyone involved in this process for bringing us together. I'm really excited about the next 1 hour and everything we're going to be talking about. A little bit about me. I started my journey of change at the age of 13 and founded my own nonprofit at the age of 15. My goal has always been to empower more people to realize that they can be a part of change and that they can make a difference. Today, I think realizing that we are one of the biggest parts of the problem also makes us realize that we need to play the biggest role in building the solution. And so, bringing those tools to people is what I strive to work for. I founded Why Waste at the age of 15, and it aims to change the mindsets of people towards water. We build simple solutions that allow every individual to become a part of the process when it comes to tackling water conservation. We've built multiple solutions across the board, including pioneering the glass half full movement, building our own app that allows you to calculate your water footprint, and even writing our own book. Our work has reached over 10 million. It has reached over 6 million people, and we've been able to save over 10 million liters of water. Of course, the journey was not simple. We were young people, we were a bunch of young girls trying to make a difference. But I think that's a story we'll dive more deeper into through the conversation. But I'm very proud that we get to be where we are today. Thanks to the support of multiple stakeholders across the community. And it's conversations like this that give me hope that there is so much more for us to do together. So, again, thank you, Urja, and really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Garvita. Hi, Gayatri. I see you also joined the
Hi,
conversation.
hi, Urja. I think
How are
I
you?
was on a wrong link for some reason, so just got the right one now.
Oh, so sorry. So what we're doing right now is that we're just opening the floor for introduction. I would love to know about what you do and more importantly, why you do. So, if you want to go next, would love to hear your your introduction and your background.
Sure. So I run these three organizations. One is Buzz on Earth, which actually started off as a media platform, and right now it is serving as a digital hub for sustainability. And under Buzz on Earth, we have Buzz on Earth Media, Buzz on Earth Academy, Buzz on Earth Consumer, and Buzz on Earth Corporate. So we are trying to mainstream sustainability and leveraging the power of youth, technology, and media to do that. And other organization that's a not-for-profit, it is called Gaia the Earth Foundation, which is primarily taking a step beyond sustainability towards regeneration. So there we have a flagship project called Mission Prakriti, which is into forestry initiatives.
Oh
And
wow.
the third organization is that for the young people, and Garvita here is there. She is herself very young. So that is meant for people who can be the would-be, Garvitas of the world, who would be probably taking climate action as a serious career option. So uniting India's youth for climate action. With that mission, we started India in Young. So these are the three initiatives that I'm working on today.
Thank you so much, Gayatri. Lots to learn. Uh, I would open it to Nupur now. If you could share your journey with us. I think there's some lag. Hi, Nupur, you're on mute.
Hi. So I was
Yeah.
just, I was just hearing everybody else, it's just the quantum of work you guys have done. Wow, like at a very, very young age. And it's amazing to see Buzz on Earth. It's amazing to see Gravita doing such cool stuff. And of course, I'll hear Pragya ma'am also Save the Child later. But so basically, I start my career with a foundation called Evolve Foundation, which was aimed to create smart, sustainable villages, where we focus in about three areas, which is livelihood, which is income generation, which is education, and also healthcare. So that's how I started. And before this, I also started like a public movement where we would I was like really upset when I came back to India with the amount of discrimination that there is in our society, and I started this movement for the purpose of creating a discriminative free society and a more expressive society. And then later on I realized that life will not I because I don't believe in charity. So Evolve Foundation is a non-profit organization which runs but to support it further, because I myself don't believe in charity and grants and things like this. We had an entire circular economic ecosystem around it, and we started selling plantable stationery, which is part of the livelihood project under Evolve Foundation, and many more things which we'll talk about later. And further to it, I realized that you know in my own lifetime, probably I'll be only able to take care of one village, two village, three, four, five maximum, right? But what about so many others? So me and my partner Abhinav is also my husband now. We got together and we started a for-profit social enterprise called Kiwi Kisan Window, and we are looking at somewhere around 35,000 farmers across India, and a lot more than that. We'll talk about numbers. We'll talk about different ideas as soon as we graduate to the next section of our conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nupur. And definitely, last but not the least, Pragya ma'am, would love to hear your thoughts.
So, I mean, you can call me Pragya, really. I mean, honestly, when you hear young people, from Gayatri to Nupur to Garvita talking about their journey, I mean, I think it fills me with a lot of hope and optimism. And optimism too, because optimism is also realistic in a lot of ways. Uh, so talking about journey, I mean, I think it's in a way the journey of any woman and every woman is often and always about claiming and navigating the space that's theirs. And that's not enough. And so sometimes what seems very easy for many is also a function of navigating that space. So, what becomes our enablers from education that puts us on a path that kind of pushes us there? And then you navigate your space into finding who you are and your voice. You recognize certain privilege that you come with because, but also that's a disadvantage for many, very many in the country. So I would say that the journey has to be personal to be able to make a voice that is political and conscious for not just yourself, but if you have a voice, how you use that privilege to speak about or talk about the narrative and the stories of very many, because there are, I'm sure, many Garvitas yet to be found who are doing amazing work. But how do we use our privileged space to bring them to the fore, share their stories with the world of awakening, of changing, of impacting lives? So for me, I mean, I think my life has been a sum total of learnings, really. I mean, rather than just looking at it as a careerist, I would say that there are certain values that define how you forge forward. And for me, it's always been about that if you have your voice, how do you use that voice to tell the stories of those who are not able to hit the headlines or not? It's about how do you shift the power. And one way to shift the power can be about how do you share that power, not just in their presence, but in their absence as well. How is it this space I cannot take for granted? And how do I use it more meaningfully? So, say, for instance, hearing all of our earlier speakers and panelists, I mean, they did talk about, so I am not so much into green career, so to speak, very, very directly. But I feel that the role that I play as a part of my work at Save the Children is how do you bring these voices from the margins to the center? How do you empower young people to be conscious of an ecosystem which are they are living in, but also that they will be inheriting, the younger generations and after. And the responsibility as adults is one towards young people, and second, how do we create a bond between the generations of young people and a little older community, and probably the generations before, to create that bridge from the present to the future. So I think that's what I would do more consciously, both personally and as a part of my work. So yeah, that's who I am. But as work, I also had campaigns for Save the Children, working with young people, both at Save the Children and young people like Garvita, who always inspire us. Because I've had a chance to also work with her a bit, even though So I feel that. There is so much of hope and optimism. So that's where I would leave it. Over to you, Urja, to take forward the discussion.
Definitely, and it's so important, and that's the reason why we also want to do this panel, to bring different perspectives, different people from sectors, to come together and talk about some of the pressing challenges that they face, or they have seen other people face in their community. So going back, I think our evening looks starry already, and we have some of the stars who've done such impeccable work in their own spaces. Uh, but however, like while this looks so, uh, you know, commendable from outside, I'm sure that there must be so many challenges and, trials and tribulations that each one of us must have gone through in this journey. So the first question that I'm extremely curious to know is your are the challenges that you've gone over in your journey of becoming who you are today. So anyone who wants to take the first stance?
I think you should go with the youngest one.
Yeah.
Definitely. Kavita, you're here.
That's too much pressure.
I know, sorry, we're just bullying you. No worries.
um, but no, I think that's a very important question, Uja, and and I'm all of 22, and I know that there's only a road ahead of more challenges to navigate, which I, in many ways, also look forward to because I love to, solve those problems. But I know I can speak as a young person, and I still recollect when I came up with the idea of, okay, now I need to go approach restaurants and get them to conserve water. I remember I walked into a restaurant and someone saw me from a distance and they were like, "Oh no, she's a kid. We don't even want to talk to her." And then there were other folks who were saying things like, "What value do you think you can add? You're so small." And so, as a young person, I think that was a huge challenge to navigate. Navigating the whole um, idea that we don't matter and our ideas don't matter, and we're not valued, was something that I always felt as as something that needs to be changed in the ecosystem, right? Because youth, and even I'd love to talk about women today specifically. We grew up. I'll start with youth, right? We're growing up in a world and in a generation that is so different from any that came before us, and we have the capability to think differently. We have the capability to think more rationally and creatively, just because we've forever grown up in problems around us. And to be very specific to women and girls, I think uh, the empathetic mindset that we bring to solving problems is so unique and so valuable, and that's also what makes me aspirational and hopeful, that we need to see more women in those leadership positions, leading movements and leading businesses, because today they need to be run with a more empathetic mindset, because it needs to, building a world where ecology and economy can run in tandem. That's what the green jobs and the green world is all about. So I think, of course, personally navigating those challenges of being young, managing everything with your studies, convincing people that this also matters, were a few things that I had to wade through. But I think it's like, Pragya also mentioned, it's through the support of ecosystems that we've been able to build where we are and become who we are. Incredible support from people like her and so many more in the ecosystem who are really uplifting the work that we're doing and allowing our voices to be heard. And that's also something that I personally, really love to do, is help more and more young people realize their potential to become change makers. So I think that's the perspective to bring into this ecosystem.
Thank you, Garvita. Gayatri, I'm also curious to know your perspective on the challenges given your journey in
Um,
this space.
Yeah, certainly. So I will actually start a little with my history. So I grew up in a very small town. My father was in Indian Navy, but my mother took up a job in a school that was in a very small town, and that led me to do my class 10th and 12th in a very small town. So from there, the kind of ambition one would drive would be to go for a regular, graduation and then go forward. And I mean, a very so-called settled life that is aspired for women in those regions. So for me to not settle for something like that and aspire to do something more purposeful was, I think, the first thing that I would say was a challenge to convince even the vicinity and the larger family around. That was the first challenge. And the second was, being from a very conservative background and the family structure, so getting married too early and then trying to pursue your career post marriage. So that was, I would say, another challenge wherein you have to continue to push your boundaries. You have to get the buy-in, because as a woman, you always have that additional responsibility to have the consensus, which is also a great, I think, attribute that I should probably credit women with, that we are able to drive consensus in what we do. So we are not always going on a rebel mode, and that's not even required if you're able to drive consensus. And sustainability and climate action is such a thing where you require a lot of fearlessness, a lot of courage, and a lot of consensus building attitude. So I would say, so those traits were actually very, subconsciously building in me, which I was not really aware of. So I went on to do my graduation from an IIT. I was the only, person in that entire community and the city who got to get into an IIT. So that was a big deal. But after that, after my marriage, also I continued to do my MBA. I did that from ISB, and even that was a challenge because my classmates used to wonder that why do you need to do an MBA? You are already settled and you have this and that. And during my MBA, I remember when this question used to come to me, because I was working in Wipro before going for my MBA, and I was a sustainability anchor for Wipro India, which was very much, I would say, a good role, very much aligned with my passion for sustainability. And when I was in ISB, people would, come back and ask me that, when you introduce yourself, so what exactly is sustainability? So I would explain to them what sustainability is, and that would be, I'm sure that I would have explained that at least 100 times, if not more. And that led me to think if this is the kind of understanding in this privileged lot. So I'm trying to tell you the challenges of all kinds here. So now a place like ISB, which is having a certain socioeconomic status and the kind of student peer group, which is not aware of what sustainability is in this well-educated times that we live in. So I realized that the way we probably communicate sustainability and the subject, that is not, right enough, and that is not engaging enough for people to understand and talk about it. I think that seeded the thought of Buzz on Earth in me, and I thought that media being the biggest influencer, and we know that media has been able to push boundaries across areas, and what all it can do and it has done. So I thought, I don't come from a media background. And given my technical background and an MBA, I was nowhere cut out to do something in the media space. But just to pursue the passion that I had to bring about a change, I took the course and started with Buzz on Earth. And then the next challenge that was facing was on the VCs and investors side, where people would come back and say that you are a solo female founder. So, how do we need to have somebody, in your team who's a male and a co-founder, so called. So that was another challenge, and that actually we were having a discussion with the dean just 2 days back of ISB, and this was one of the points that came up. This is another, we are talking about breaking the bias, and here there is a bias in the investor community itself. On one hand, you're celebrating women empowerment, and on the other hand, you're actually limiting them, right, by expecting them to have a co-founder. Then the next challenge came in when I went on to do my work in forestry, because forests is my passion. Actually, when I was in Thane, when my father was in Navy, I grew up in forest, and I really have that love for trees, nature, and I want that to be the future for the children that we have in our country. And when I started off with that project, many people were like, no, 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 Gayatri ji, that is too big a challenge that you're taking upon yourself. You won't be able to drive that. It requires too many things. It requires this, that. But then finally, I'm so glad to share that we have been able to pull across 5,000 acres of forest in last 2 years. And we are going to grow 100,000 acres of forest in next 5 years. And with that, just 2 days back, we got even recognized by United Nations Environment Program for the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. So it is just about trying to take that leap of faith and believe in yourself and press those boundaries more and more. So that's what my story and challenges have been.
Wow. So
Yes.
inspiring. And one of the things that I definitely catched on was that ambition, and that understanding that ambition can come from anyone, anytime, any stage, and towards any profession that they might be doing, right? We keep limiting that, okay, this is a certain profession and there people, this is a certain gender, certain age, but it can come at, I mean, there's no limit to it, right? And your work definitely speaks on that. Uh, Moving on, would love to hear from Gayatri and Nupur as well.
Yeah, hi. So that I think challenges everybody's very very articulated it. So I think being a woman is a very big challenge in our country or the world, because the world is quite patriarchal. And so it's kind of challenging when you say, as Gayatri said, a single woman entrepreneur, it's a challenge to convince any investor. It's a challenge to convince that you can also do something. uh, and also like a lot of challenge where you take your product out and you're trying to sell it to the world, and they're like, oh really, okay, let's just do some charity for you. Like they don't really take you seriously. They're like, you're just like joking around. So I think that's number one challenge, which I think all of us sitting on this panel here sort of faced. Now coming to my own challenges. So for me, I think so I wasn't able to accept the fact that I can just fit into a wall. There's a song, just I just don't want to be another brick in the wall. So I just wasn't able to do that. May it be in my school, or may it be in my college, or may it be in my professional life. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So some odd reason my internet's just conking off every second. So yeah, and I think so. When I came back from England, I would just like to start from there. When I came back from England, I was, like I'm from a very typical Banya sort of a family, Banya Marwadi family, and they expected me to sit, at their business, and they expected me to do that, and and that's what even I thought all my life, that that's something that I want to do. But when I eventually got into sitting at the office with my dad and mom and trying to work things out, and I just wasn't able to fit in. And I was like, no, and I was so upset because this is something that I was always looking up to, like I work with my dad and grow his business and all that stuff, because that's what is, put into your mind, coming from a business class family. And so yeah, and then I was like really into depression. I went into like great depression because I could not I did not like what I'm doing. And I myself was like broken down, because this is something that I had thought that I will always do, but I wasn't liking it. So clearly had no idea. So I went, like I became like really, really sick, and I had no friends and everything. I was hospitalized. I got major dengue. I was literally on deathbed for like 3 months, like legit deathbed. And then like the sudden revelation sort of a thing happens to you, and you realize, oh my god, what's the purpose of my life, and then you start writing things which you remember, or which things that really motivated you. So in this entire journey, I would say that even my parents didn't understand. Forget about the society, forget about the world. And I had no support. I was like completely ill and lowest of the low. And So like, yeah, people don't understand, right? And even you don't understand yourself sometimes. So that's what happened. And this, I wrote down a diary, and in that diary, I wrote down that what are those things that I remember, and why do I remember those things? Because I was so much on the deathbed that let's just remember my past and see what good has happened to me in my life. And so I, like, from my earliest of my memories, I sort of wrote down things and why I remember. So what I realized was empowering people really makes me very happy, and that is when this spark, and that is what gave me this motivation of just getting out there and doing something that matters, and bringing in a change, and empowering people. And I thought that in like, the way I could empower people is, first I need to empower myself. And where do I get the energy to empower myself is through empowering people. So that was the lead, that was the purpose of my life. And then I don't know from where, one of my dad's friend, he came up and he told my dad, you know what, if your daughter's not liking what she's doing with you, why don't you work, why don't you become an IS officer and not work in the office and everything. And before this, trust me, I didn't even know what an IS officer is. Like, I had no clue what a civil servant is. And then I, just to escape from my dad's office, I started preparing for civil services. And I used to go for coachings in the evening. And it was the third day of my coaching that my teacher was teaching me fundamental rights. And I started howling in the class, and I realized, my teacher realized that she's not okay. So he just asked me, like, should I stop the class, or you want to go out and all. So I said, okay, fine, I'll go out of the class. And then, like, after the class, he came up to me, he's like, what just happened? I said, sir, you know what, I just realized the fact that a person like me, who's well educated, well traveled, economically privileged, privileged, what 99% of the people in India probably would not be. And it's not only financial, but like, three generations in my family are educated and things like that. And I do not know my fundamental rights. What about the other 90% people who uh, who do not have all these privileges? And that is the moment I further got on to my focus of, like, what do I need to do. So the idea of Dehradun Drum Circle came in, and so on. And trust me, there was nobody to believe in me. Yeah, I started Drum Circle with about 2,800 rupees. I started Wall Foundation with a fund of like 6,000 rupees. I started Kiwi Kisan Window with my partner, again with a very, very small amount. So there was like nobody, so I think that is what gave me motivation. And I always believe this, that wherever there's a challenge, that's an opportunity. And that's how you should look at things. It's not, oh my god, this was a very big challenge, what would we do about it, let's look into it and everything. I think all that you need to look into is reflect onto yourself and see what is the possibility in this challenge, what is the solution in this challenge. So if anybody today asks me what was the challenge in your life, I would really not come up with any answer, to be very honest. I would say that whatever challenge there was, I never realized or recognized that challenge, to be honest. All that I thought for myself was that, what is the solution, what is the possibility, what is the opportunity here, rather than how I will not be able to do this, how the world is not supporting, how families don't support. It is okay. I think my dad's no support actually brought me to where I am today. I think if it would have supported me, I probably wouldn't have done anything in my life, to be very honest. It is because his constant nagging, that what are you doing? This is all crap. Prove like you don't know anything. So just to prove it to him, you know, that no, there's something called as a social entrepreneur. There's something, you don't only have to be like Jhansi ki Rani nahi banna hota hai. You can do a lot and you will not lose life. Like how parents are so insecure, "Arey nahi, inko to bade limited." That's why majority of the parents want their kids to become either doctors or engineers or very, very secured things. I was like, there are people who do this also. So yeah, but now everything is a possibility and not a challenge.
How brilliant.
Yeah,
So I think it's just so inspiring listening to each one of you. And I think this reminds me of a quote because I love reading. I think words are my go-to power. Okay, so I think there's this one of the leading feminists, who said that when women tell their stories and share their as pure human truths, maps change. And I think that's what we need. And we women do not share our stories enough, especially the stories that make us what we are. And whether it was Gayatri, Nupur, or Garvita sharing about there were these stories that make it really human. And I think early on, I mean, I would say that people don't believe when I tell them that I was an introvert child, but that's what I was. And because of the circumstances or wherever, whether parents wanted it to be a protective one or probably. And I feel that, books became, as I said, my go-to friend. So say, for instance, all my answers lived in my imaginary world until then. And when you begin to sort of look at it as a practiced hypothesis, I mean, I think as you were saying, both, I mean, I think Garvita and Nupur, you both said that, somewhere that realization when I moved out of Patna, where I did my schooling and came here for my undergrads. And I think that was when it shaped me as who I am, in terms of, often enough you feel that you're not fitting in. And that fitting in is not my problem. That fitting in could be that I am not going with what everyone is doing. Probably my likes, as they were different and unique, which was me. So I think that's where the journey really began, to identify where I was located in the larger ecosystem. I always wanted to tell the story. So I did study mass communication.
It lost her.
Yeah, she's joining
Am
in.
I
Yeah,
audible? Okay,
yeah.
cool. So I think that's where the journey really began, that through the child, spending time with yourself, my childhood. And then when I came here, I think that consolidation of who you are, that's a real test when you're alone. And I always believe that, that unconsciously, you begin to identify and locate your strengths as totally who you are. Um, and shapes you as who you become. And early on, when I started to work, I was just out of college, and my first work was with, of course, legendary Kamla Basin. When you see someone who is a living example of what could be navigating space and leading example for many women, you feel that, what could you do for young people that you feel benefited you from your generations before? Um, and I constantly feel, whether it's a group, whether it's in your team, or whether with anyone you meet, what could you do which could be an enabler, no matter how small it may be. And I feel, I go back to what I was saying earlier, that the sisterhood, we don't celebrate each other enough. Even women don't celebrate each other enough, because this is such a hard earned space that people had to clamber that road with so much of struggle and challenges, that we hold on to it unknowingly often. And it's so very important that if you have that space, how much more enabling and empowering and enriching and refreshing it becomes when you create that commune of women and celebrating each other, rather than keeping that power to yourself. So I feel that personally for me, it's always, you're looking for that learning. Whether you talk to a young girl, Lucy, who may be in West Bengal, who tells you that this is what matters to me, instills hope. And I often feel like, Nupur, you were saying that we all have our own challenges, but whenever you are drowned in that, and you see one spark where the challenges are as basic as life itself, and then you realize that, that's when you lift yourself up and say that, hey, you know what, this pales into oblivion in comparison to what the real challenges may be. I also feel that often, despite having a voice, I mean, there would always be people who would find some problem with you. If you speak enough, you may be dubbed difficult. If you put your point, you may be seen as aggressive. But why just women? While these values are celebrated when it's a given for men, why do these become problem? And I think that's also is something that you challenge that status quo all the time, which may be status quo of perception, where certain things are a given for. So it's a constant. We can never say that we have arrived, because different contexts will position ourselves with a situation which we have to navigate and ensure that we carve a niche for at least yourself, because by doing that, you're paving the way for the others who may come into that system. So I feel that as a women, we owe to ourselves. We don't owe it to the society. We owe to ourselves to claim that space that is truly ours. Because if we do that, imagine if someone comes into that space, they would carry that mantle in a much, much sort of empowered way, because they don't have a, because today we don't have precedence. We always have precedence of fitting into the mold than breaking the mold, in structures, in society, whether you look at marriage, whether you look at, and I always feel, and I still do, that I don't fit in. But I think it's a good thing, because when you don't fit in, you consolidate what you feel is your mold. You're not fitting yourself into a mold that is pre-laid by someone. So I would feel that till we are alive as women, and probably we do hope that in this lifetime, we are able to see that just, fair, equal world for everyone. But I think it begins with each one of us owing to ourselves. That's where it begins, the journey unto ourselves. And then how do we create that path that can be owned by many more? And it could be in small and big ways. You need not be impacting just thousands or millions alone. But if you're able to change even one life, you mean that you have changed an ecosystem. So I think those are some of the learnings, I would say, amidst the challenges or walking that path, that it's harder, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible, because, whatever, bring it on. I mean, I think that's the thing, that, every juncture in your life would offer you new challenges, but also it's an opportunity. Like, someone said that it's really, really important that we see as that and look at it and say that, okay, I have to lift myself and pave the path for myself first, so that it can be the path of many others. So, yeah.
Definitely. And as you said, right, like learning from the challenges instead of just talking about the challenges itself, right? And I'm just loving the conversation of how human it was, right? Uh, the struggles that we went over and in each one of our journeys was so different but also similar in some way, where we had to battle over some bias that came upon us. So I would, in the next question, I would really want to understand that, like, while we all go over the bias, but we must have thought about some way of how to tackle it, or maybe some of the ways that we can talk about how we can, individuals can do to break that bias that stands in the society in various forms. Yeah, opening the floor to all.
This time we let either Gayatri or Pragya start.
I like
Whoever
that.
wants to, yeah.
Pragya, you please go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I think wherever it starts, it's always the pressure is on there. So I would say, I mean, I think most of us, I mean, we shared that in bits and pieces, even in the different sections, because breaking the bias is everyday affair. But I would just want to sort of share a few things which I feel could be future forward for us, and what I see could be an opening of the opportunity. I mean, whether you look at any area, I mean, or spectrum, from, like they say, that the journey of a girl or a woman begins right, the journey of discrimination begins right from the womb and continues till the tomb, and in between you may reach the boardroom. So, so, so I feel that while we may think that we are majority of us who are sharing the stories where we have been able to sort of somewhere make a dent, at least if not for anyone, for ourselves, and that has become something that changes lives for many others, especially given the work that we all are doing. but I feel that it's the opportunities are not equal. And I think that's where we have to start, that, recognizing the privilege that we have, but also recognizing the fact that many, and if you pick up any example, like whether you look at climate or disasters or discrimination, social patriarchy, poverty, look at any structural bias, and it always adversely impacts women and girls. And suddenly I'm thinking, and I'm not just citing data, but I think it's very vivid when I was reading, like, just, okay, let's take a very fresh example of pandemic. And we have been talking about, build back better, but I think we need to build forward better. When you look at data and statistics, you feel that girls stand to lose, and the most important aspect of their life, which could be an enabler, is the education that has been disrupted, right? 10 million girls, according to Right to Education data, Right to Education Forum's data, 10 million girls, learning has come to a pause. Instead, what is the future that awaits them? Either they will be pushed into child labor or into early marriage, and worse, that awaits them. So I feel that I'm moving away from personal now. Like, while it's important to recognize these larger systemic challenges, and in which we have to locate ourselves both as solutionist, in our, that's where your personal comes in. And how do you also recognize that that may not be the story for many, so the path is an uphill task, so that that story that we are sharing of success becomes a story of every girl everywhere. um, and I think that's where we can, it should not be a story of
Sorry, I think we lost Pragya again. Just
Sorry, am I audible? Sorry, I just dropped off. So I feel these data points are also important to recognize the magnitude of disproportionate impact. Imagine a generation of young girls will be deprived, or their journey would be cut short, a journey that could be of empowerment, a journey that could be of fulfilling the dreams. And that's not somewhere just out there. And that's something that we have to break the bias towards, that every story is our story. And if we are saying that, oh, that's happening there, it's a failure of collective failure, I would say, of us as a society, governance, everywhere. And each one of us have to take that accountability of what do we do to become a part of the solution? How do we look beyond data? Because if we continue to be divided in the two spectrums of so I think that's where it begins, that keep bringing the divide to, or bringing the spotlight to the divide that continues to exist even in the stratified section of the women. And how do we continue to tell that story as well, rather than just the story of success, which looks nice to hear, but that can just be a template for many to reach there. And I think, and it often disturbs me, like when it becomes, of course it's a part of work that we all do, Garvita does, Nupur does, Gayatri does, and each one of us are trying to do in our own respective spaces. But what do we need to do more? How do we need to, because recognition is important, we are all recognizing, but I think recognition has to move to real representation. Like they say, nothing about us without us. So, like whether, I'm just thinking of I was just reading this news article and something that was very heartening. Like, we all know COP26 happened. Uh, what was really significant to see that the largest mobilization there was by the mothers groups. And that's commendable because, yes, we are recognizing their participation, but I think the real representation is still somewhere missing. And that COP26 may be just an example, but if you look at parliament, are we proportionately represented? Whether you look at our boardrooms and offices and organization, is gender parity really a reality? Who wields the power? Is your top governance male heavy? So it's, if you begin to look at and locate the biases, it exists everywhere. Who has the voice? you know And I think that's where the real battle, and that's an everyday battle that you have to be consistently, fighting to win, right? Not to fail, because if we have found a certain mold, we will keep at it, right? And because that's a promise you make to yourself, that this is who I am unstoppable, and I will continue to be who I am, to be able to even break that bias that, hey, woman's voice doesn't mean she is difficult. It's a voice of representation, and it's a voice that needs to be heard and counted. So I think these are a few every day. I mean, I think it has to be, from macro to micro. So when I talk about data points and the realities which show us how women continue to be disproportionately discriminated against, but at the same time, unless we look at that as a macro, which means that also tells us the journey we have to traverse to every day, how we are sort of navigating. Are we conforming, or are we resisting, or not just resisting, making way for ourselves? So I think that's where I would say is an everyday affair. It cannot be like ek din utke you will do it and then they say, okay, now I can take a rest, I've tackled that. So it's an everyday journey. It should become a part of you. So sorry, I mean, I just got a little too um, carried away in that, but yeah, I think it's everyday affair.
Great.
Sorry, go ahead, Gayatri, please.
No, no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just picking some thoughts from what Pragya said, and there were these things coming to my head that I wanted to share. I remember hearing this quote by Oprah, where she said, "If one woman is able to turn the world upside down all by herself, then looks to me that all the women together ought to be able to turn it the right side up." And I think what Pragya was, talking about, that, we need to be there for each other, we need to share each other's stories, that resonated so deeply in the moment, because you feel it, right? Change starts alone, but change happens together. And so it's only through our collective responsibility. And I was also reminded of this small incident that I recently faced. So to be fully honest, in my own home, I've never felt any discrimination in terms of being a girl. I have a younger brother. I feel no difference in the way that we've been raised, and I'm so grateful to my parents for that, and the kind of world they are also setting for their peers and the world to come ahead. But I recollect having a conversation with someone in our community recently, and it was so biased, and it really hurt me so deeply. Where they said that, oh, now in a couple of years, Gavita is going to get married and settle down, and her brother's going to go, abroad and do something. And I was like, just because I've already done some things, doesn't mean I'm going to stop, or doesn't mean that there's this fixed path. Why can't I be the one who goes out and does things? Why does someone else get to decide where I stop or where I don't, or what I choose to do? And I think I think we're in a very interesting conundrum in the world, where half the world has understood what women empowerment means, and the other half is still struggling with it. So it's also about bringing those two worlds together and building, I think, that level of positive mindset to make and enable that kind of change, where I think there was this another very interesting thing I remember watching is where people ask women, um, so how do you manage work and family? And I know I've still not reached that level, but it was so exciting. Someone asked this woman, how do you manage work and family? Do you miss your kids while you're at work? Do you miss your work while you're at home? And she responded saying, please stop asking that question. It's a stupid question, because of course I miss both when I'm not there, but it's my duty to do both of them, and I will do it to my best effort, and it's with the support of the community that I have. So I think that was bang on, and that's absolutely how we need to be looking at these ecosystems and growing each other. And when we say break the bias, we also need to break those biased mindsets that already
Yeah.
exist. And that's just a thought that I had.
Yeah, very well said, Garvita. And Pragya, I was also pretty excited when you were talking about this word consistency, because that's so important. See, we can talk about compassion, we can talk about, the competence that women bring in, we can talk about the courage with which we need to move forward. But all of these attributes have to be consistently present, and they
True.
have to be, they have to be, we have to be unapologetic about them. So there is nothing wrong about, being competent. There is nothing wrong about being good at something and being bad at something, right? So while I think there is some sort of pressure that women deliberately put on themselves to be number one in everything that they do. Like, even if you're trying to draw a small thing, you would want to make it the best. Even if you're trying to cook something, you'd want to make it the best. So while that attribute of trying to bring in excellence into whatever we do, that is great and welcome and has to be consistent. But I'm saying even the fact that you're not able to do something should be equally, okay, and you should be cool
Okay.
about it, and your peers and your ecosystem around you should be absolutely okay about that. So this would probably relieve a lot of pressure from women, and that will also lead them to take better choices for themselves, because
True.
that pressure, that I'll probably fail, I'll probably not deliver my best, that prevents more than 90% of the women from doing what they are really capable of doing. And if we could somewhere as a society lift that pressure off them, that will really be a very good thing. And I would probably, in my case, I would credit my parents to do that, because I was never, under that pressure that no, you have to. They were absolutely. I remember when I was in grade 11, I was not too good, in a certain subject, and my father was very cool about it. He said that it's okay, even if you fail, that's completely fine. Nobody's going to say anything to you. So that one statement was such an enabler, and I think that was one of the reasons why I could really excel in my studies and could do much better than what I was otherwise going to do, because that pressure was gone. So I think same is happening in the, and you brought about the point about pandemic, especially pandemic. We are very privileged. I mean, being women who are working and living in societies that we live in, we are actually privileged a lot. But when you look at those underprivileged women who are living in rural areas, and for instance, if I say farmer, do you ever imagine a woman farmer in your mind? The word farmer itself paints a picture of a man. So
Yeah.
that itself is a bias in certain extent, and that bias is existing also in these areas where women who are farmers. In fact, where forests where we are working, we have more than 70% farmers as women, and that bias has to change. And the kind of reforms and the kind of help that we plan to offer to farmers in the name of so-called farmers should be more towards women farmers. And until and unless I add the word woman, will somebody recognize that it is meant for that
Yeah.
profession? So I think these biases are there, and maybe in a certain strata it is not realized as much, but across different what do you say groups, we are experiencing biases of different kinds, and just being aware of that and being uh, you know cognizant of the fact that we have to break it consciously, that itself can do wonders in solving it.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Gayatri. We're very like running a little short on time, so would want Nupur to also talk about how we can break the bias, and then I could bring in some points towards the end.
So I will not speak much. I think all the women sitting on the panel have just kind of aced it. So I think breaking the bias is एक कहावत है, आपने काफी सीरियल में भी सुनी होगी, सास भी कभी बहू थी, वो नहीं करना है, you know. So I would cut it like really really short. कभी भी ऐसा नहीं होता, ससुर भी कभी दामाद नहीं होता, you know, because I think because of our ecosystem, because how the history is written, because how the society has been weaved, it's always saas bhi kabhi bahu thi, you know. That's how we've been portrayed. And एक औरत ही एक औरत की दुश्मन बनती है and things like that.
True.
So I think that's the biggest bias, you know. Bias vamp only women, bias bitch only a woman. So I think these are the kind of this is like a very big thing, you know. मतलब चुड़ैल,
Yeah.
मतलब why isn't Dracula is always like a woman, चुड़ैल is always a woman. So you know, and again सास भी कभी बहू थी, one of the most hit serials of the times ever. Like so I think that is the biggest thing. Like I feel women need to support women. So that's how you can break the bias. Trust me, that's the only way. We need to have episodes of Sasur Bhi Kabhi Damat Tha types. So yeah.
Definitely. And also with the fact that, women who empower and embody themselves, and, they are sometimes not accepted by society, right? And they're given off names. So that also comes into some of the spheres of what we were discussing. But thank you so much for an insightful discussion today. And I think one thing that I've really understood is that amongst all of us, or people who are taking some step beyond their what they conventionally do, it's more of the journey of self acceptance, and how they're supported by community, by different people along the way, to really that empower them to take that step, and to basically take that step towards change. So just and I would also want to end this panel by saying that, like how we've all embodied our own personal journeys. I hope that the women who are watching this panel are able to do the same. And the only thing that I would say is that we're rooting for you. So we're here, and definitely we would want that we have many more women entrepreneurs who are here on this panel next year, talking again about their journeys and sharing it with more and more people, and creating a bigger and larger impact. So with this, I will be signing off, and Simran will be taking on to the next panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
Thank
so
much for
you.
much.
having us.
And
Bye.
every woman should really support. Like you should take it a target to make one woman entrepreneur, like to mentor one woman entrepreneur every year. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
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 you,
you
you.
for
guys.
having
God
us.
Bye.
bless.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Hello, everyone. My colleague Simran is facing some technical problems, but I'll be taking over in her place. So I'm Ashish. I'm also from MASH. It was such a pleasure listening to such a great panel on women entrepreneurs who are advancing the work towards climate change. And next panel is another power pack panel, which is going to talk about how ESG is playing a role and what are different women leaders in this space creating more opportunities for many, many more young women and change makers out there. So the next panel is moderated and led by Smita Hari, who is Vice President at Octus ESG. Hi, Smita. Good to see you. I
Hi,
request.
Ashish. Hi.
Hey, hi.
Yeah,
Thanks, Smita. So I request you to take it forward and introduce our panelists.
great. So thank you, Ashish. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me and to moderate this session today. And it's a pleasure to be, discussing on this very pertinent topic. So just to give some context, so the last 2 years of unprecedented global health and economic crisis has attributed, heightened importance to sustainability and ESG by corporations, financial institutions, and society in general. So climate risks have also become very real, with both the frequencies and intensities of climate hazards increasing every year. And this is not just specific to a particular country or geography. Climate change can push, millions into poverty without proper mitigation or adaptation measures. So therefore, it becomes very critical to transition to a low carbon and environmentally sustainable and a resilient world, so to say. So the recent COP, which happened, the Conference of Parties, which happened in November 2021 at Glasgow, has only heightened the action around climate change. And the commitments to net zero have been given. Many countries have come out with, more and more countries are coming out with the commitment to net zero. So, what is interesting to note is that while countries have started putting out commitments and targets as well, companies have also started thinking in this direction. So, the corporate sector. So, the significant uptick in the participation of corporates in COP26 signals that the private sector is pretty serious about climate change. So, 350 companies around the world have committed to net zero. This was as of November 2021. So, the number is growing, and this is both backed by regulations as well as investor pressures. the corporate sector can play a pretty meaningful, crucial role in ensuring that countries meet their individual targets. But what is also true is that there are not many options left, right? So when companies may be exposed to significant climate-related risks, if they fail to act on time, as the transition to net zero picks up. So one of the many actions which the corporates can take is embedding the ESG consideration. So basically, the environmental, social, and governance considerations into the business model, rather than keeping it in the sidelines. So rather than restricting it only to CSR activities or to make it look like a feel good factor. Instead of that, making it a business case can help in moving the needle from policy to practice. And when we consider the intersection of climate action and gender, the discussion becomes even more complicated, given that women are disproportionately affected by climate change more often than not across the spectrum. So, raising awareness and building momentum for gender responsive innovations and climate action initiatives, right? So, that is the need of the hour that would promote women's advancement and empowerment. So, in essence, what I'm trying to say is incorporating climate agenda at the board level with sustainability or ESG committees. So that would offer a top-down direction to reaching the net zero targets, and embedding these practices within business strategies, within operations, that would give a bottom-up flip. So it's essential to have it from both sides. So, what are some of the global best practices adopted in the space of ESG? How can integrating ESG into business models help in attaining the net zero targets? So, what can be done to break the bias, which is the theme, right? And promote the role of women as change drivers in climate action? And how will conversations and actions around climate risks and climate opportunities emerge in the coming decade, which is like a very crucial decade, this up to 2030. So these are some of the many aspects which we are looking to discuss in today's session. So with that, let me move on to our panel discussion of the next 1 hour or so. And I take great pleasure in welcoming our panelists. So first we have with us Harpreet Waka, who is the Senior Director, Head of India Operations at Purpose PBC. Hi, Harpreet. So, just a quick introduction. As a Senior Director at Purpose India, Harpreet leads the India office with a focus on building the India presence, guiding India growth strategy, deepening partner relationships, overseeing projects, and managing the India team. Hi, Harpreet. Next, we have Prerna Wadikar, who is the Adjunct Professor, ESG and Sustainability from IIT Gandhinagar. Hi, Prerna, welcome.
Hi,
A
Sweta.
polymath yes, hi. So a polymath with rich experience of over 12 years with some of the most influential global thought leaders at reputed businesses, governments, and civil society organizations in 7 countries and 25 states in India. Prerna is the adjunct professor of ESG and sustainability at IIT Gandhinagar. And finally, we have with us Soumya Suryanarayan, who's the lead impact and ESG at Avishkar Capital. Welcome, Soumya.
Hi, thank you so much.
Yeah, hi. So Soumya leads the impact measurement and management and ESG practice at Avishkar Capital, which is one of the leading impact-focused investment funds in India. She's responsible for driving implementation of IMM, the best practices in ESG integration within Avishkar's portfolio companies. So it's great to have you all with us today. And so with that, I think let's jump into today's panel discussion on the value of ESG growth in the race to net zero. So to start off, I'll request each of you to kind of briefly share your first cut thoughts on how adopting ESG frameworks, integrating ESG practices into business models can help in achieving the net zero targets. So what are some of the key trends that you're observed in your respective industries of moving towards net zero on the back of adopting ESG frameworks? So let me start off with you, Soumya, given that you lead ESG practices of India's oldest impact fund. So what you have looked at on these aspects in your portfolio companies?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks a lot to MASH Project for inviting me for this panel discussion. And it's lovely to meet all the panelists here with so much depth of experience. So I think before I share, how we adopt ESG within the portfolio companies, right? Just to give you a sense on, what Avishkar Capital does. Um, like you mentioned, Smita, we are the oldest and the pioneer impact investor. We, with assets under management of around $500 million right now, and we've been working in the impact investing space even before the term was coined. It's been 2 decades now. We've made around 70 investments in companies that create economic and social outcomes, and environment sustainability is a huge component. So while we didn't call it net zero, we did, put in place processes to track carbon emission reduction, or to improve the environment sustainability practices of our portfolio companies. So for us, investing in impact entrepreneurs with high risk capital and creating jobs and livelihoods, opportunities in broken ecosystems, I would say, typically in low income states, has resulted in impact and returns, which are primarily the outcomes, right? And for us, again, making an investment in impact investing doesn't equate with ESG compliance. So, ESG for us is a tool which is embedded within our investment process to strengthen the business operations. So, if we are making investments say, in clean energy or waste management systems that are impact first, we work with companies to see how we can strengthen the process further to make it more ESG compliant. Are they following the ESG environmental regulations? Do they have the best HR policies in place to support the employees, or the suppliers or the vendors? Uh, so we look at all of that, and as responsible investors, right, we believe that strong ESG processes are required to be followed by companies we invest in. Um, and therefore, like I said, it's integrated within the investment process and how we evaluate deals. So we, in fact, our ESG assessment started as early as 2013 to enhance business operations. So because for us, it is not just enough to have a good business and have good intentions, but they need to have adequate processes in place that can strengthen the business further as they expand, right? So to keep it short, yes, this is how we look at ESG. It has to be integrated within our investment process, and we use that as a tool to see how we can enhance the practices.
Sure, thanks. Absolutely, completely agree with you. So, from moving on from the for-profit business model state, let me come to you, Harpreet. Given that you've extensively worked in philanthropy phase, non-profits, etc. So, how have you seen this pan out in such businesses?
Great. Thanks very much, Smita. Just to clarify, I've worked across philanthropy and nonprofits, but our purpose is a for-profit social impact agency. But I've seen the spectrum, and I think that's very. I think ESG has a really important role to play, and as Soumya was saying, moving from well beyond to seeing it from moving it from being compliance to a business imperative is really the journey that is so important. And as Smita, you spoke of, we're starting to see that happen across different players in the sector. And I think that's just such an important trend. There's definitely more that could be done. Like in all my experience, it's really down to the leadership of organizations to start to find those shared values and how the ESG mandates can be truly integrated into business philosophy and business mandate and into business model innovation. And that's really what's going to help us move the needle to get to net zero. Um, and uh, and and I think it's that disruptive change that I think particularly corporate leadership can bring, because the innovation and scale that we can get from that sector is really important. Having worked on, and a purpose, we work on pushing climate action across various issue areas and really understanding what it is. I thought I'd maybe just give a few examples that we've come across in our work. And I think one area that I really see how business models can really come in strongly is one is on, if we look at the area of energy use, waste management, pollution treatment of natural resources, it's very clearly noted as environmental criteria. And looking at business innovation around increasing circularity in waste and business processes could truly help both business from a cost perspective, a brand positioning perspective, but also meets the net zero goals. Others we've encountered are, and I've heard, and we've worked in this, campaigned in this space actually around sustainable fashion. Then equally, FMCG companies looking at innovations in the supply chain, because carbon footprint is coming from mobility and energy use throughout those supply chains. And there is more than strategic reason for the companies to actually be looking at fostering innovations within that, particularly in a market where consumers are increasingly looking for sustainability. And so I think there's just a big brand presence, the number of startups and new businesses we see coming up with those. I think equally large companies could see how that integration of the ESG practice into the business model could be critical. And the final piece I was thinking of when I think of ESG being integrated, it's not just about reaching net zero, which we can do with new models and mitigation. But I have a feeling that businesses and ESG mandates have a strong ability to impact how we reach net zero, and that inclusivity and justice that can come as we innovate, whether companies do it while thinking of their worker rights or skilling. Those business model transitions which are definitely happening. It's a question of time, I think, given the risks that you spoke about, Smita. The ESG mandates can actually be enabling to support that, and so that could allow us much more just and equitable transition. So I think there's a huge role ESG can wear, and I really appeal to leadership across companies to help integrate that into the thinking.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So I just want to pick off this point on innovations which you were talking of. I come to Prerna with that thought. So Prerna, innovations helping the cause of climate change, so such as your own innovation, right? So I was just doing some reading on you. So they are required at every step of the way to get to net zero. So how do you think embedding ESG practices can help this?
So I'll just share some very interesting statistics, Smita. Recently British Chamber of Commerce published its report on small and medium businesses in the UK, of course, on what they see their carbon footprint is. The good news is that 50% of the business owners said they were concerned about the environmental factors and climate emergency. But the bad news is that less than 10% took any action or even bothered to measure their carbon footprint, which is the first step on the path to net zero. Answering your question on what kind of innovations would work, I would suggest that if businesses look at ESG from the lens of business risks and opportunities and not as a mandatory box ticking exercise, which almost always ends up being, there is huge scope and huge scale, because at every instance in a business there is opportunity to improve its production efficiency. There's opportunity to improve the resource efficiencies, its capacity. And if businesses use the integrated risk management approach to address, like you started very well with the climate related risks of physical risk, transition risk, and liability risk, and convert each of these into their business opportunities by either product expansion, market expansion, business repurposing, that will be a win all outcome.
True, true, correct. So some very interesting opening comments. So now, I'd like to turn to you, Soumya and Prerna. So until recently, ESG has been a ritual phenomenon, right? So even in developed countries, up until 4 or 5 years back, many would have thought it to be a vague concept, purely because its linkages with investments and finance were not really very well established. But with rising global investor focus and increasing regulations as well, it is soon becoming more and more widespread, more and more acceptable. So could you reflect on some of the best practices that you might have come across in the space of ESG? So I'll start with you, Soumya.
Thank you, Smita. I think you very rightly put, it's like climate change 10 years back. Everybody spoke about climate change, but not really understood what it means. I think somewhere, if you see, there is consciousness, like you mentioned, that everybody is talking about ESG, but nobody understands how practical, because it comes with a cost to the company, because they have to change certain processes to actually enhance their processes, right? Or be ESG compliant, I would say. So the thing is that since the space is actually seeing many people making efforts, and to understand the ESG space and its applicability, and how can they can sort of make the business better. You have corporations, like you rightly said, setting up net zero targets and seeing ways and means to improve their own business operations. So I think that it in itself is like a good practice or a good way to move forward. And also, when you look at the investor community, right, just to give you a sort of a metaphor here, investors have always looked at investing in companies like, I would say, as individual trees, right, without looking at the wider economy, which is, say, a forest. So COVID sort of taught us the importance to look at the ecosystem, and it is sort of clearer to us that how climate change can wipe out all the development efforts we've made just with a flood or with a cyclone. And so, therefore, this has sort of influenced how global capital is being invested in companies right now, right? Which is such a good move. And you have more conscious investors. In fact, if you see the UN PRI, you have close to 3,000 signatories, and they manage a total fund or AUM of USD 100 trillion. So ESG is no more like a trend, and it's an investment strategy. And now it is the time to consider environmental and sustainable and governance objectives while we are making an investment into a business. And even in India, if you see, there's a huge push for companies to adopt, or at least the listed companies to adopt the BRSR. So, which is again a very positive thing. This is at a more macro level. What we are seeing at the business level or at the company level is that you find entrepreneurs being more open to understanding how they can implement it. So when we look at early stage companies, right, we see how we can strengthen their institutions so that they are able to create that positive social and environmental impact. It could be as basic as setting up their HR policies or identifying gaps in their HR policies to strengthen it. Diversity is a huge aspect right now, so we look at that. So you see companies wanting to make that those changes, or buying, say, even from organic certified farmers, or helping farmers to achieve that organic certification. So those are the kind of good practices that are coming up actually, and we are seeing a lot of openness to adopt. If, say, even a 5 6 years back, if anybody, it was more like a checklist sort of an activity, and today you actually see companies being more open to adopting those practices. So I think that's like a good practice or change in mindset that has happened.
That is very encouraging to hear. I mean, since you're talking to companies on the ground, and they are relatively smaller, like down the supply chain, so that's quite an encouraging thing to hear.
And sorry, just one thing which I wanted to mention is, in fact, Avishkar has launched a new fund, which is a $50 million fund on, which is called the ESG First Fund. So, like I said, a lot of SMEs, they want to uh, adopt ESG, but they're not sure how to do it. Right? They focus more on reporting and disclosures rather than seeing how it can be part of the business strategy. So we have launched a fund to actually help mid-sized companies, to sort of enhance their ESG value and see how we can, through our investments, create that positive impact. I just want to end with that.
Sure, sure. So, Prerna, moving on to you with your DFI and academic background as well. So, what could be the best practices? What are the best practices you've seen, and what could be done to kind of strengthen these?
Firstly, Smita, I like to debunk the myth that ESG is very progressed in the Western world, and that's why I started with the British Chamber of Commerce report as well. There's definitely a lot of noise about it, but when it comes to actions, even these big DFIs who mandate other companies to implement ESG do not have their own ESG reports. So if you cannot practice what you preach is a very fundamental question that we have to be aware of and be critical of. Uh, Answering your question that what are the best ESG practices, you rightly said that ESG is dynamic, evolving, and in my class I tell my students it's alive like a human being, and what was relevant yesterday might not be relevant going forward, and it might completely transform. So few best practices. First, for example, British Telecom has, under its inclusivity pillar of the British Telecom Manifesto, clearly set a target to eliminate the gender pay gap and have 50% female workforce, 25% ethnic minority, and 17% people with disability. So they are going far beyond just recruiting women and calling it a DEI or inclusivity initiative. And this, I feel, is a very important step taken by the company. Another example from an investor activism lens is the case of Jana Partners and CalSTRS Pension Fund, where they publicly wrote a letter to Apple management and got them to incorporate parental controls in their iPads and iPhones, which before this has not happened as successfully or as visibly as they could get it done. Third is an example from Schneider Electric, where I had the opportunity to work almost a year ago. And today it's a leading organization in sustainability. So, what Schneider Electric does is it uses its ratings from Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Climate Disclosure Project, and EcoVadis for sustainable procurement to grant shares to its senior leadership across the management, and thereby integrating the seriousness of ESG in the organization and not letting it be a side activity in the overall company. Another very interesting initiative taken by Schneider Electric is the launch of its first sustainability linked bond. And in this, the company defined that if it does not meet the minimum level of sustainability score, it will pay an amount of 0.5% of the nominal unit value. So these initiatives ensure that ESG is integrated in the DNA of the organization. Every single leader, every single vertical is thinking, living, and breathing the ESG factors within the company.
Very interesting, Prerna. So I'd like to pick off from where you left on the leadership, and I think even Harpreet spoke about how leadership should buy into the idea. So coming to the governance angle, right? So research has shown that companies with a larger share of women in management have better ESG scores, especially on the G aspect, the governance aspect. So, how do you think better governance practices can help in changing the net zero narrative in organizations? Let me come to you, Harpreet, for this.
Sorry, I missed the question a bit. How can what was the
So
question?
basically, how better governance can help in changing the net zero narrative.
I think governance is really important but when it links to leadership, as I said, in terms of where is the leadership pushing and how they are really imbibing what does net zero mean for their business, how then it then prevails into the business philosophy, way of thinking. Now, whether if it's an investment, then do your investment thesis. But if it's running a business like Schneider, how do you incentivize the leadership to work through that? I think, like the example Prerna just gave, or how do you encourage and incentivize innovation in day-to-day processes that can meet ESG as a business imperative? I think that's extremely important. I think it's also, and so that's one in terms of where does the push come from and the kind of governance you put around that. So there is accountability. So you may make commitments around where you want ESG mandate to be, but how do you hold it accountable. And I think that's really where the governance and the leadership incentivization and structures you put in place help. I think the other piece is who's involved in setting up, both in thinking through ESG, but also in setting up the governance and controls around it. And I think Brenna alluded to this, but the diversity, equity, and inclusion that you imbibe, even in coming up with those governance processes and systems and structures, is really important, because I think that influences the kind of perspectives they go into it. What you define as ESG for yourself as an organization is just so important to what you will achieve from it. And so I would say it's about who's in it, who's leading it, who's holding it accountable are all really important elements
True.
to it. And I think net zero needs to be dejargonized is the other piece. So what when I say break up ESG, we could state it as becoming net zero, but I think it's even like breaking that down. And what does that mean for an organization? Because it could mean very different things. And the general understanding of net zero is a very scientific term, just as climate change was a few years ago. And so I think there's a lot of dejargonizing that could really help us. And in the business context, maybe sustainability or some version of that word works stronger than net zero. And I think we shouldn't hesitate from using the language that works and propels the most action behind it.
Right. Absolutely. So, Prerna, given that, let me come to you. So, given that you've seen different countries, I would again like to kind of come back to this point on governance itself, because it's an important thing, right? So, how do you think governance is? I mean, how different it is from, say, a developed market to something like in India?
So I think Harpreet very beautifully covered it, saying that governance is the key to unlocking ESG in organizations. Uh, what I see here is a small example. When people are recruiting your board members in India, it's more like these companies approach the board members. They say, "Will you please join us?" And then there's the further discussion on how and what and where. Whereas abroad, it is just like any other job application. There is opening, it's listed, you apply, and you apply from a pool of competent people. You give multiple rounds of interviews, and then you're selected based on your competency and the governance skills gap. So I think that is the first and the biggest aspect that needs to be balanced between the two. And I'm sharing the example of India because that's probably more relevant. Between the two geographies, or the two West and the global South and the global North. There was a recent survey that was conducted by Global Data, I think in 2021. And they surveyed 1,500 organizations globally to gauge how they are implementing their ESG plans and their ESG strategy. Now, again, this is very interesting to see that this is similar to the British Chamber of Commerce report, that more than 65% of leadership in these multinational organizations said they were concerned about ESG factors and particularly actively pursuing environmental pathways. But only 7% of the boards were found to be competent to deal with it. In the sense, they were aware of what climate issues are and how it affects their business. But what should they do to address those risks? How can they leverage these risks and convert them to opportunities? Was a huge skill gap that was observed. And Harpreet again pointed this out, that net zero needs to be dejargonized. So that was a very critical observation. There was another study, and this was by New York Stern School of Business, their sustainability vertical. They've surveyed about 1,200 board members across 100 large US corporations and found exactly three companies who had climate expertise on their boards. So, what I'm trying to say with these instances is that this is an opportunity for boards to incorporate diversity in the boards itself. In India, a typical mindset is once you are a CEO or a retired CEO, ideally, you are fit to be on the board. But you will not have the climate expertise with a retired CEO, because 30 years ago, the priorities of business, of education were focused on production, on growth, and other aspects which may not be as relevant today. So the diversity of the board should also include age diversity besides just gender diversity, because it's a newer generation who are studying climate academically, who are aware of climate related risks, and it is they who are going to face the consequences of climate action. So the first thing that can be done, should be done, is decouple the idea of who your ideal board member should be and decouple it with your age and your experience. Bring in expertise, and I'll leave this point
Sure.
with that note.
Some very interesting insights, which can be very useful for all our viewers as well. So, in fact, one of the projects which Optus ESG undertook some time back with about 10 financial institutions in India, and we had conducted a survey, and most stakeholders actually opined that governance is the most important factor towards achieving climate goals. So. Kind of resonate with what all of you all are telling. So now let's get into the gender angle, right? So climate and gender. So globally, it is seen that women's empowerment is one of the most effective solutions to climate change crises. However, women are not represented adequately in decision making, across the board, be it the corporate boardrooms or even, at the farm level. And this is despite the fact that women are usually disproportionately affected by climate change. So, what do you think can be done to ensure that women are involved as change drivers in climate action? Let me come to you, Soumya, first for your thoughts.
Thanks, Smita. It's a very tough question, actually, something that even we are grappling with at Avishkar. So, if you see the VC industry, right, or the impact industry, impact investing industry, the number of women across levels, across the VC industry are very low. The fund manager level, and even the kind of investments they make, right, they're all male led. So, in fact, I came across a very interesting statistic which said last year the India saw like a large number of unicorns being created, and of the I think 136 unicorns that were created not just last year but over the last 5 years, only five were women led who got funding from VCs, and that is such a stark statistic which shows that the way the VC industry needs to rethink on how they are making their investments, and especially when it comes to women led businesses. So, what we have consciously done, in fact, at Avishkar, we've taken up a very strong mandate. We have, in fact, we are the first fund in Asia to be qualified under the 2x challenge right now, which means that we have taken up thresholds to create diversity at the fund manager level. As well as in our portfolio companies. So, we will work closely with the portfolio companies to see how they can bring in diversity at the board level, at the senior leadership level, and also look at investments that are benefiting women, or disproportionately creating that economic benefit for women. So, those are the kind of things that we are looking at to see how we can increase diversity, not just at our level when we're looking at investing, but how we evaluate businesses, and once we make those investments, how companies can sort of increase that diversity. And there are definite statistics that show that having more women sort of creates that
Yeah.
good business and business growth as well. So yeah.
Yeah. So, Harpreet, your thoughts on the gender climate change nexus?
I think it's a really interesting question, and it started coming up more. But I find it really interesting that the gender and climate change thing is a new topic. So I was on a panel earlier today with the Institute of Sustainable Communities where they actually heard a colleague refer to how little research is actually out there on climate change with a gendered lens to it. Um, that intersection seems to be a new revelation within the climate space, if I could say that. And it's only recently that the intersectionalities are being spoken about. Even international events like COP last year weren't necessarily talking to those intersectionalities. In fact, it was one of the pieces that came up that more should be spoken about climate justice, and I'm hopeful. that becomes more of an international topic of discussion later in the year. That's obviously not to say that no work is happening, but I think the it's climate change has been seen as a very scientific and more elite sort of topic rather than rooting into where it is and who it impacts, and breaking through some of those pieces and really beginning to think through how climate change requires us to transition, both to mitigate any further climate change, but adapt to what has already happened or happening, um, is so important. And women, there's a very strong gender vulnerability to it, which I don't think we speak about enough. And I think the angle that you bring to it and the way you ask the question is, if you don't have as many women in decision making, is that part of why it's not there? I don't know, but maybe the kind of diversity and the kind of experiences going into where how the conversations are happening um, uh, play into it. I think ultimately, if you've got more diversity, and I think diversity and equity beyond just gender will bring in lots of very interesting perspectives on how we look at climate change. And I do think that if we're thinking of women and climate, then we need to think about it in all, like, through the chain. So it's both at the decision making and what does climate change require, and making sure we're opening our lens to that. There's research happening to it, but also that we're creating the platforms to women to speak about it. Recent surveys we did with construction workers in Delhi, we realized that women are really impacted. Like, a lot of construction workers are women, which means they're exposed in the open to different factors. They're in places where the high dust pollution, but they're not talking about it. They're not talking about the extreme heat they face. Women farmers aren't necessarily talking about why cropping patterns have changed. They know cropping patterns have changed and extreme weather events have happened, but can't link it back to climate change. And that's where I'll come back to the thing of where we need to break down the messaging, really understand what are the impacts today, and create the platforms for women to speak up. Because if you ask them, why are you not getting the yields, or why certain men have walked out of the villages, you will hear those stories. I just don't think it's necessarily been the approach. So I think there's lots and lots more to do on that front. I think I'll leave it at that.
I'd just like to add to Harpreet's point, right? One of the things is, like she rightly pointed out, there are not many studies that show the sort of correlation that, diversity or gender and climate action. And what I think consciously we need to do is also sort of start collecting data around it to see how we can, how does gender and climate sort of go hand in hand? Because if you see any climate change impact, right, we talk about how it impacts the vulnerable population, but women are, I think, even one level below that because of the economic and the social status they hold within the vulnerable community. I think that nuanced data or analysis is not done very consciously. I think once we start looking at these metrics consciously, right, I think that's when we'll be able to create or identify those gaps and see how we can make that change.
Sorry,
Very
just to
true.
add to that, I think it's also, so while it's important for the climate ecosystem to start getting the data and finding out those vulnerabilities, I think it's also important the other way around. Those who are working on women empowerment and gender to start talking about how climate is playing a role. So I was very recently on a conversation, because we also work in gender, sexual and reproductive health. And it's very interesting that climate change is starting to come up as a cause issue for not being able to attain the sexual reproductive health outcomes that many are working towards. So I think that the intersectionalities, it's like everyone in the ecosystem now just needs to start getting together and those collecting the data from all these different perspectives. And it's not just the climate side of it that needs to bring it. I think it's also understanding issues that we are already working on, or companies or philanthropies may be working on, and how the climate linkage could be very easily brought into that, and that may be an easier transition for us to meet the end outcomes.
Correct. So rather than working in silos, kind of bringing everything together is what the message is. So completely echo your thoughts, both Harpreet and Soumya. So because it's Women's Day today, and there have been questions around, how young women interested in ESG and climate change kind of can build successful careers in this space. So I'm going to go over all of you to kind of get your thoughts. Let me start with you, Prerna. What are your thoughts on what could be done?
Smita, in just 10 years' time, ESG assets under management have grown three times to $30 trillion today. And that shows that there's huge scope for growth, for opportunities. I'll break my answer in two parts. What are the academic ways in which you can develop a career, and what is the real life work experience ways? So, academically, you could take up free courses that are offered on sites like TCFD. Most of them are certification courses and very well recognized. You could also go for paid certification courses like CFA, ESG investing, or GRI or SASB. So those are clearly options. But more interestingly, especially in the global north, there are full-time courses on masters in sustainability, masters in climate finance, masters in carbon accounting. And you can choose one specific area and build your expertise in that. And the opportunities for employment after that are immense. So that's clearly there. I myself have created the first ESG course in India, which is a 40-hour full-time course that I'm offering to IIT Gandhinagar. And even IIM Ahmedabad has started the Anil Duggal ESG Research Center, and hopefully they will come up with a course by the end of next year or early next year, whatever the case may be. So this opportunities to take up these courses in a very professional manner exist. Now, coming to the work experience, it's you can't really be doing climate or ESG or sustainability in silos. So it has to be built up on a fundamental base of your core capability, which could be finance, which could be analytics, which could be management and strategy, or it could even be plain implementation or auditing. So, depending on what your core is or what kind of job interests you, you could look into ESG investing if you're in the finance space, or climate finance for that matter, or ESG auditing and implementation if you want to go the consulting route, or ESG uh, consulting itself, especially a lot of organizations don't know how to implement ESG or what exactly should be the programs that they should do to achieve their ESG targets. And there are opportunities there as well. And lots of volunteering projects are opening up, and MASH Foundation itself is working with Shiv Nadar University on something very interesting. So please do watch this space.
Thank you, Prerna. Over to you, Harpreet.
Yeah, no, I'm very interesting that there are actually so many now academic and educational routes open to ESG. Thanks, Prerna. Even I didn't know. And so many of them, but that's really interesting, right? Because that just shows how even from an education route perspective, it's a career option. I was going to give, when I heard the question, a broader answer, um, to say, I think now you can make a career in ESG related areas in whatever field that you might be interested in. If I mean, I just think I work at a creative communications and campaigning agency. So someone wants to do campaigning and communications, you can find on and all we do only do social impact communications campaigning, right? So if you want to be a campaigner on ESG topics, you will find us or others, and that's a career option. Whether you trained in it or not, you may have trained as a communications professional. Equally, if I think the nonprofit space and the philanthropy space has opened up so much. Companies and consultancies have opened up ESG departments that become there, and I'm not. And many of us have evolved into them, and my foray into ESG didn't come from that training, but interest. So I think you can, wherever you want, create those angles because they sit in so many places in the ecosystem now that I think you can find those. But I think the even more exciting avenue is the young entrepreneur, like entrepreneurship opportunities. Because the way that now new consumer trends, for example, are a lot of this, Soumya would know this better than I, but I think a lot of the FMCG startups that are coming up and getting funded, so many of them are coming up with sustainability mandates that I think there's a whole entrepreneurship route that is open to work in this space. In fact, we did a campaign called We the Change, where we actually went and identified people who associated with climate change and said they were young change makers and have found careers in that. This is something the UN profiled before the COP last year, and we got almost 1,000 applications of entrepreneurs sitting across the country in urban, rural contexts, and many of them were women. In fact, the prior panel had Garvita, who was one of those profile, and she's made a career out of that. So I think the opportunities are endless right now.
Great, great. Soumya, your words of wisdom.
I think I just have two things to add here. So when I remember when I started out in the social development sector in the sustainability space, like a decade back, a lot of this was considered marginal and not very attractive for young men to join or build their careers. VC was a more exciting space to be a part of, and not ESG. So actually, I find women, a lot more women in this space, which is very exciting. And you see them taking up leadership roles in organizations right now because they were able to make an early start, a decade back. And right now ESG is such becoming such a central discipline, so it's very encouraging to see actually a lot of women leading ESG or sustainability in big organizations and even in VCs. So the idea is actually to have a conviction in the theme. I would just say for young women who are interested in ESG, have conviction in the theme in order to build your career or succeed in this space. So if it's only about, selling of more products or, having a better position in the company, then it may not be for you. But if you're passionate enough and you identify a mentor whom you can tag along with, who will, sort of guide you in this space, because while there are many women there and many professionals there, it's still a new space. Not many understand what exactly the role involves. So you may want to attach yourself with a mentor who can guide you on this. In fact, I have, sort of, I'm in touch with a few young professionals who want to build a career in this. And it's very exciting to see their thought process. Millennials and, the young professionals think very differently uh, about the whole sustainability space. So it's very exciting to hear their thought process. So I will just say have conviction in the thing and you'll succeed.
Great, great. So thank you. So some wonderful points there to all the women who are watching this session. So great. So we are coming to a close of the session. So before we wrap up, would love to hear each of your closing thoughts on how you look at the dialogue around ESG and climate risks and opportunities spanning out in emerging markets over the next decade, given that this is an extremely crucial decade when it comes to addressing climate change. And net zero commitments are only going to increase. So let me start with you, Harpreet, your closing thoughts.
I think I actually think this is just going to get more and more important. We're going to keep, like, it's just going to get more and more prominent. So we, I'm quite optimistic that we will ride the change. We will see a lot more action happening within ESG and trying to address climate. And I'm very hopeful that there's going to be a lot of women driving that. So I think definitely there's a lot of work to do, but the fact that the conversation has started now, I do hope we'll be in a very different position 10 years uh, from now. I feel like the conversation will move from what should we be doing or should we be doing it to rather have we done enough and how could we do more quickly. And I look forward to that change in conversation with a lot more variety of people talking about it. I think the climate change ecosystem has been too narrow and very, a set of people that talk about climate, but I think that's broadening is happening, which is very exciting.
Great. Thank you. Prerna, over to you. Your closing words.
Yeah, I think for ESG to be truly impactful, companies should stop or should start delinking ESG returns from their quarterly financial results and look at ESG as a long term business strategy. So that's one point. And another point I want to really underscore here is that organizations, investors, as well as rating agencies should look beyond the carbon tunnel vision that we all are falling prey to, because it's far more easier to measure, track, and manage carbon emissions than it is to look at social and governance aspect of organizations, which are equally, if not more, important.
True, true, Prerna. Thank you. Soumya?
I think we need a lot more dialogue about ESG. Like I said, it's like climate change 10 years back. Everybody talks about it, but nobody understands what it actually means, the term means, right? So we need more dialogues, and how we can
People are still
practically.
understanding climate change, I think. Sorry to bother interrupt. So we are talking to people and people are still grappling. People are still understanding.
So imagine ESG, there's so many frameworks, so many disclosures, that the company needs to understand and see what is best for them. So I think somewhere we need to have more dialogue, more learning, more understanding, and sort of have a more practical approach to implementing ESG. Because ultimately it shouldn't be like something that restricts the business growth, but adds positively to the business growth, and as well as the environmental and social aspect as well. So I would just leave with that. We need a lot more education. We ourselves need to understand how to implement it. I think if we can do that, I think that'll be great. And happy Women's Day
Yeah,
as
happy
well.
Women's Day. So, sure. So, great, that was wonderful. Just to quickly sum up what we discussed in the past 1 hour or so is how ESG should be a long term strategy. It should not just be a tick box or a compliance kind of an activity, and how governance and leadership should kind of, lead the way to for companies to kind of execute this and embed it within their business strategies, rather than looking at it as a separate exercise. And some very interesting points on how women can build careers, on how there are so many options available. You need to have conviction in what you're kind of getting into, and how it could be a big opportunity for all of us. So while we're looking at it from a risk standpoint, climate risks, there could be opportunities across the board for people to innovate and kind of come up the curve there. So with this, we come to the end of this discussion, just on time, I think. So thank you very much for the team at MASH Project Foundation for putting this together, for inviting me to moderate the session, and special thanks to all our panelists. Really appreciate all of you taking the time to be with us today and share your insights. So have a lovely evening. Happy Women's Day. And I think I'll hand it over back to the MASH team right now.
Thank you so much, Smita. It was such a pleasure listening to all the amazing women leaders, our panelists, who are doing such amazing work in creating progress towards ESG and building a more sustainable future for all of us. What could be a better day, way to celebrate the International Women's Day by listening to all the young change makers, the entrepreneurs, people supporting more young people, and all diverse stakeholders coming and sharing their experience, their insights. It was really really pleasure listening to all of you, and I would like to thank all of the panelists to take out their time from such a busy workday schedule, and moderators, both Smita and Urja, for moderating it so well, and especially my colleagues. We have a very active, very power packed, passionate team of young people at MASH, which is again a majority of team are women, which gives us every day a sense of great pride in advancing the work that we are doing across different issues that we are working. And also, it's a very interesting time to talk about how ESG shaping and so much conversation that is happening around climate change and sustainability space. Like Prerna already mentioned, that we are creating very interesting platforms and programs with our partners, from research to thought leadership to advocacy to building more careers for young people in this space. It's a very, very exciting space where we will see conversations like these, not just limited to the boardrooms, but to be done in the classrooms, to be done by small and medium businesses and startups as well, who are, like it was talked about, many, many more entrepreneurs who would come and create very innovative startups in this space. So I invite you all to join us. We are always looking for some interesting partnerships on building a more enabling ecosystem for everyone. With that, I would like to wish you all a very happy Women's Day, and I hope that we continue to keep breaking the bias and empower many more young girls and women to become the leaders of tomorrow. Thanks. With that, I'll sign off and look forward to work with you in the future again. Take care and see you again very soon.